Om Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharma swarupine avatara varisthaya Ramakrishna te namaha. So we begin today's class from uh, the first chapter, which has been aptly named The Need of the Age. What was the need for Sri Ramakrishna to incarnate? In our previous class, we studied, or rather, we discussed Swami Shardananji mentioning that the avatars uh, normally the concept of avatar has come from the Puranas, and the Puranas give a detailed description as to the characteristics of an avatar and the conditions under which he incarnates. So the need of the age is the first paragraph of the first chapter, which will discuss the birth and childhood of Sri Ramakrishna. The Swami Shardananji begins this chapter by discussing the level of progress humanity had made. You should remember this was more than 75 or 70 years ago, or maybe even more than 80 years ago, that he had started writing and completed writing all the chapters of this book. It was a serial which he published in Udbodhan, and later on they were all put together in these 5 volumes of the. But now the English version is available either as a single volume book or in 2 volumes. So the first 3 parts, which deal with or the first 2 parts rather, which deal with his childhood life and his birth and his childhood, his divine birth, the childhood life, and then we come to the sadhak bhav, or the period of his life when he did intense sadhana after going to Dakshineshwar. And then we have the 2 parts, third and fourth, which discuss Sri Ramakrishna as a teacher of humanity. And finally, the last part of his life, the display of divinity, very prominent display of divinity before concluding his divine play, as it were. So he concludes, and that chapter deals with Narendranath, because Swami Vivekananda had taken Mahasamadhi in 1902. So naturally, a lot of biographical details were available, and his life was even published. His life was published by Advaita Ashrama. So Swami Shardananji included some of the incidents, because if had Swamiji been alive, I don't think his biographical details would have been mentioned. But since he had taken Mahasamadhi, so Swami Shardanji thought, because Swami Vivekananda was such an important part of the spread of the divine play of Sri Ramakrishna, he played such a wonderful role. So that is why the last part of the volume of the 5 volumes is known as Divya Bhav and Narendranath, as he was known. After sannyasa, of course, he was known as Swami Vivekananda, but to Sri Ramakrishna, he was Narendra. And Sri Ramakrishna endearingly used to call him Naren. Now, Swami Shardanji begins this volume by saying that humanity's progress in the present age, means in the age in which he wrote this this wonderful volume. So he says, in the present age, in this current age, that is the age in which they lived, he says it is very easy for even an ordinary person. You see, he had written this book from Calcutta, which was not Though it had got all the benefits of modern civilization had not yet reached the rural part of West Bengal. So many readers would be reading this book, though uh, it was the headquarters of the British Empire in India at least. So naturally, the fruits of modern science and technology had not fully reached India. So Swami Shardanji begins by saying that even an ordinary person who is away from the city, not part of the city of Calcutta, even he, an ordinary person, can see to the extent which human beings are making progress all over the world through knowledge, wealth, and self effort. So that was natural because the media was, newspaper was perhaps the only media. We didn't have social media. So people had access to news through the various English and other Bengali vernacular journals and books. And people had a fair good idea, though many of the Indians were not literate. And but still they managed to get the news from other people about other countries. That's why Swami Vivekananda wanted literacy, especially among the women, to increase so that they come to know what is going on in the other continents. He said no country has ever progressed by cutting herself off from the entire world. One should be well informed about what progress is going on in the different parts of the world. Nowadays, it may seem to be very easy with the development of information and communication technology. But in those days, it was extremely difficult to get the news. In fact, some of the news was deliberately suppressed, especially the negative type of news. When there was a famine, I don't think the readers in England or elsewhere were even aware that people were dying by the millions due to the natural famine and sometimes man-made famine. So there was now, if even a single family dies of starvation, it will become national news or maybe even international news. These things were unheard of, and naturally, when Swami Shardananji wrote this Leela Prasanga, the only available social media was newsprint and books. Of course, the books would not depict the progress that the world was making, the current progress. Of course, they would uh, contain a lot of knowledge, and that was the only way knowledge was transmitted, or through the word of mouth. But newspaper was a very important medium where uh, people could get an idea of the kind of progress, especially in the field of knowledge, secular knowledge, I mean, wealth that was generated. Several countries were getting richer. Of course, they would do this. They were doing this by exploiting the resources of the colonized countries. But there was a lot of wealth generation, and this was not unknown to most of the youths, especially in Calcutta. And the amount of self-effort which resulted in knowledge and wealth all over the world. So many countries were being prosperous, were becoming prosperous, perhaps at the cost of the colonized. But at the same time, there was an ambition, a hidden ambition in all the youth of different countries because of this, uh, because of the way they saw progress, increasing the living conditions of people in the developed world. They also wanted to make efforts and become materially rich. So, Swami Shardanji says, it seems that in every area of life, I mean the secular area, people do not want to be confined to a limited sphere. This was particularly true when we consider the developments in the material civilization, because spiritual truths are often not as popular as the wonderful discoveries of science and technology. They think they'll, because man's vision is always external, as we discussed in the Wednesday class on human possibilities. Man has been habitually looking outward. So progress in the outer world makes a deep impression upon him. The natural tendency of the human soul is to look outward, because that is how our minds are trained. That is how education is imparted, unfortunately. At least 50% of our educational effort should go towards developing the inner being or the inner personality. Our gaze should not always be outwards. That is what our spiritual tradition teaches us. The wonderful spiritual tradition that India developed very clearly said that if you want to develop all the human possibilities, it will not be enough if you develop the outer personality. There are so many things which we have to develop within. So the external development which mankind, especially in that age, whatever little progress was made because of science and technology. Now, of course, we have made stupendous progress in all the scientific and technological fields. And for the last 30 years, or even you can say last 50 years, there has been so much of progress, which perhaps even Shardananji would not have imagined in those days. Of course, they had that prophetic vision which could visualize this kind of progress in geometric progression. We can see how even in those days the discovery of the steam engine and the means of transport, big ships, trade, and all those things were generating wealth and knowledge on a large scale. Globalization had already begun, but the emphasis was on the external development. Prakriti, when we look at Prakriti, there are two aspects. One is the avidya maya or the avidya prakriti, and the vidya maya or the vidya prakriti. There are two distinct directions this prakriti takes, and that is the greatest discovery of our yoga. The philosophy of yoga and the Vedanta and all the other systems, they delved deep into the mysteries of human nature. They found that external development of man is not the only development. There has to be a parallel internal development which will make his life complete, which will make progress complete. So part of his personality is developed by his external development, like development of the body, development of the material surroundings to the advantage to increase luxury, comfort, and ease of living. Those gross things are necessary. Obviously, they are necessary. They have made life much more easy compared to the Stone Age, where people had to fight each other for food. Now things have become easy, more systematic. But that has not ensured that all this knowledge, wealth, and self-effort has, due to the self-effort of man in the external world, has been matched by a similar development in the internal world, collectively speaking. I'm not talking of individuals. Individuals always have striven to develop themselves internally, because they found that their development or they are not exhausting the human possibilities completely by merely developing the external world, the external personality. They feel that there is some emptiness within them. Some existential need tells them that there is something within which also needs to be developed. The possibilities, the internal possibilities have to be explored. So, but here Swami Shardanji is beginning with some of the great discoveries that were made during those times. Now, of course, the list goes on and many more discoveries can be added. But at that time, there was certain things which were apparently very new, and that fascinated the human mind, especially the scientific and technological mind, and the youth were being increasingly impressed by that. So he says man was dissatisfied, both externally and internally. But external dissatisfaction, I mean the dissatisfaction which he felt in a very gross way, he wanted to solve that. And he says dissatisfied by traveling on land and water, which was there for centuries before that age, in those days. They have invented the aeroplane. So that was a new discovery apparently. And though aeroplanes were not so common in India, but Swami Shraddhanand had obviously heard that there were quicker means of transport than land and water. So he says human beings have satisfied their curiosity by diving to the bottom of the sea, by exploring erupting volcanoes below the sea. It's not just the volcanoes that erupt on land that were studied, but even he discovered by diving deep that there are wonderful volcanoes which are erupting now and then the bottom of the sea. So he is just making a list of all the wonderful discoveries or the external possibilities, the gross possibilities that human beings discovered. He says they have unveiled, he goes on to write that they have unveiled nature's mysteries by climbing to the peaks of perpetually snow-clad mountains. The Everest was conquered, and also by crossing oceans. They have discovered new signs of life similar to their own in creepers, trees, and other plants. That is the great contribution of Jagdish Chandra Bose. Perhaps he is referring to that, that just as human beings, even the plant kingdom responds in a similar way. And they have gained knowledge of the animal kingdom through observation and experimentation. So all the advances in biology, both animal biology as well as plant biology, led to so many wonderful discoveries. They controlled, he, in a general way, he says, mankind achieved control over the 5 elements. You know that Sankhya philosophy or the Vedanta philosophy believes that there are 5 basic elements. See, Indian mind was very fond of generalization. He did not like many particulars, so many particular branches, this diversification. Whenever he got a chance, he tried to classify and categorize the particulars into general categories. And the minimum, see, for example, when the human mind was discussed in Patanjali's yoga, Patanjali was not satisfied by so many disturbing situations of the human mind, worries, anxieties, envy. He says there are so many problems and it just confuses mankind. Now you see modern counseling or modern psychiatry, if you see, there are thousands and thousands of diseases. Every year, practically a new explanation is given, a new problem is created, then you have a new way of treating those mental problems. And then you give big names and confuse people, like we have ADHD and so many mental disorders. And people think because the more science, the more research you do, the more particular type of diseases you discover, the more you need specialization to handle that. So, but Indians found out a way, the Indian mind, the Hindu mind found out a way, said, why not go to the root or cause of the problem? We have problems of the mind, but let us classify them and reduce them so that we can manage them easily. Of course, the root cause was reduced to just 5 kleshas: avidya, asmita, ego, raga, things that you like, things that you don't like, dvesha, raga, dvesha, and abhinivesha, some kind of fear or clinging to life. And with a master stroke of a genius, Patanjali, who was the father of modern Indian psychology, said that deal with these 5 problems, then you will deal with all the mental situation, all the mental problems. So that was the genius of the Indian mind. They perhaps people think that they have not developed the external sciences or even the psychology and other things. You will hardly find a syllabus which discusses Indian psychology. They think the information or the studies in Indian psychology have not been so vast because there is less confusion. The problem has been solved by a few generalizations which will solve almost all the problems of the mind. That is what Patanjali has done. That is the genius of Indian psychology. You don't need so many different conflicts, the names of so many complexes which modern psychology has discovered. And every time the poor patient, is given a name by his psychiatrist, he gets confused. And then the pharmaceutical industry, uh, which is motivated by greed, introduces new drugs and new methods to control that, to make human being more dependent on these medicines. So I just gave you one example to show how complicated things which could be really understood in a simple way. So Indian science, whether it is the science of the mind, psychology, or the science of the external nature, the science of materials, they were classified and reduced to certain generalizations, certain general principles. And with that, if you handle those, then you deal with the entire thing. If you want to deal with the mind, just deal with these five kleshas, which are the root cause of all the minor ailments, the minor fears, the minor worries, the minor anxieties. Everything can be controlled by controlling these five kleshas. So yoga goes to the root of the matter. So they say don't just solve individual problems, particular problems, and do PhDs on each one of these problems. That's what Western science, they have developed that way. They gave so much importance to these particulars that they went on and diversifying. Now the problem has become so complex that to solve a simple ailment, physical or mental, you have to go to so many specialists because the knowledge has been diversified, and that is how the confusion increases. And people who are apparently healthy both physically and mentally, are referred to doctors, maybe because of there is some kind of selfish interest in doing that. We do not know, but maybe mainly because of ignorance, that people go to these, they think they have a problem because they have been told that they have a problem, and some names are given which further frightens them. And instead of solving it at the grassroots level, they go after these specialists who have their own access to grind, and they manage to complicate the problem further rather than solving it. So yoga and all this wonderful Indian psychology goes to the root of the problem. So also in the material field, mankind discovered that if you reduce all the elements to into five categories, we reduce all the different diversified elements, the inanimate objects, into five categories. Earth, that is solid. Water, earth is the name. Prithvi means anything that is solid. Water, all the liquid that is flowing, anything that flows. Then fire is something which can be compared to fire. Is nothing, it's neither solid nor liquid, it is some kind of plasma state which is uh, bordering both solid and liquid. So fire, and including the gaseous state, of course the gaseous state, the gas, solid, liquid, gas, and ether, and the plasma, all these things have been classified into this fire. And then we come the gaseous state, where things, when you heat certain products, when you heat certain elements, they just first they get liquefied, and then if you heat it further, they just evaporate, they become gas. So air, so earth, water, fire, air, and ether is the primordial substance which comes under the category of quantum particles. Ether is the fundamental substance, the building blocks of the, you can say, the gross universe, the gross elements. So these are the 5 categories, and controlling, achieving control over these 5 elements: Prithvi, that is earth; Up, that is water; then Agni, that is fire. Fire means plasma state, and then we have the gaseous state, and then we have the fundamental particles. So if we have control, our ancient scientists also knew that these can be reduced to the 5 elements. Of course, things are not as simple. They follow certain complex laws, and they knew the science of how to handle earth. Some of the pillars, if you see in New Delhi, which are not rusting, iron pillars, even now the technology is unknown how they did it. There are this famous pillar in Delhi which exists for thousands of years. It is an iron pillar which does not rust. So they perhaps knew the different properties of iron, bronze, and many other elements, and they were more practical, or they were practical to use those, they use that external knowledge for human development. So also we developed, just like modern medicine, based on 3 fundamental principles or doshas. Ayurveda was developed. So Ayurveda, though now we do not, there are very few universities which really go into the scientific methodology. If that is done, we can have a wonderful medical system which can treat the diseases at source. So knowledge was pursued in the external field, and a lot of progress was made. But apparently Europe and the Western countries, they went ahead in the race. They discovered many more things, and a lot of development in the external world, Prakriti, in science and technology, took place. And Sardhananji adds one more thing to the list, that they were still unsatisfied with whatever discoveries they made. So they started exploring far off planets and stars, and have already succeeded in this quest to some extent. He's saying some extent, but after that man landed on the moon, there were mission to Mars and beyond. So in one paragraph, before introducing Sri Ramakrishna's life, why he was born, he is explaining the situation when he was born, just before he was born, how much, or maybe when he was living. So humanity had made tremendous progress after the 16th or 17th century in science and technology, in the external world. But that is not all. A lot of power, a lot of wealth, a lot of knowledge was generated because of human self-effort in the external world. So, but then he says, in addition to that, it was not only in the external field, or in the external gross world, in the world of elements, that this progress was being made. So he says, in addition, human beings do not lack the energy or the zeal to explore the internal world. So he says, internal means the world of mind, the subtle world. So it's not that the Western world, or even the Indian scientists or the Indian wise people, scholars, they did research only in the external world of inanimate objects or living beings and other things. They also made a lot of experimentation in the inner world, the world of the mind, the world of thoughts, the world of psychology, and other moral virtues and other things. So every day people, Swami Sardhanji says, every day people are making new findings in that field also through broad experimentation and research. By studying the mystery of life, the inner life of living beings, external beings, inanimate objects are very easy to handle. They are more controllable because their inner life is apparently very simple. They yield themselves to manipulation very easily. and they do not resist like living beings do. When we handle an inanimate object, it is far more easier to handle chemicals in the laboratory than handle human beings or animals in the laboratory. So the mystery of life increases as we come to the living beings. So they could understand the evolution of one species to other. That's what Darwin and all those theories were very popular. So Swami Shardanand ji, who himself was a medical student, says there was so much of research into the internal nature of the human being, how human beings evolve from one species to another. So by reflecting on the nature of the body and the mind, when we come to medical technology or medical science, this nature of the body and mind, the psychosomatic effect, that effect of body on the mind and the effect of the mind on the body, these subtle connections were also discovered, and they ascertained that the mind consists of subtle matter. This is a discovery made by the Indians who studied the human being in depth. They said the mind is nothing but subtle matter, which perhaps the Western psychologists or the Western students or the Western scholars of the human personality did not discover. So the mind was reduced to a subtle matter, which can be influenced, which can be controlled just as you control external matter. This is just subtle matter, which has a beginning and an end. There is a thing known as destruction of elements or conversion of elements from one thing into another, the external gross elements. But there is another thing which is known as transformation of the mind also, the mental vibrations. So Sri Ramakrishna could transform Girish Ghosh's mind from a mind which was so much disturbed, so much of uh, with so much of problems and so many evil tendencies, into a mind which was saintly. So it is just like transforming any other chemical or any other element in the world. We can similarly transform the human mind also. This was another discovery which was made in the Indian subcontinent, that just as you handle these elements, manipulate them for your benefit, you can also train people to uh, through satsang, through many other means, through counseling, you can transform their minds also, because they are as malleable and as easy to control if you know the technique as physical elements. So human being discovered that. Swami Shardanji says that every event in the microcosm means the internal being, like that of the macrocosm, is regulated by an inviolable law. And they perceived that there is some law which governs both, and they saw some invisible cause and effect associated with suicide and other mental disorders. This is what Swami Shardanji says. When we see how mental disturbances come, just as when we diagnose certain diseases, we do the blood test, we find what are the viruses, what are the bacteria, what are the other things going wrong in the body. Similarly, they dissected the mind. It's not just the Eastern Hindu mind that did it. Of course, they began earlier, but the Western mind also tried to find out that invisible chain of cause and effect that results in mental disorders and even sometimes suicide. So this internal study in the internal personality of man occupied man's attention, and this led to a further field of study. Now Swami Shardanand is slowly taking us on a very brief journey. This is very important to understand the place of spiritual life in our day-to-day life. Why spiritual life is important? He doesn't just like a scientist, he is approaching it in a very rational way. And he says, first man was enamored or was just looked in wonderment at the wonderful uh, powers of nature. He handled them, and there was development in the external nature. By keen observation, he found it is more easier, especially the Western science and technology developed fast, because they found that it is much more easier to handle the gross elements, to manipulate them, and also the plants and the animals. It is very easy to manipulate the plants with the biotechnology, and other things were developed so that they give more yield, and all those things, developments in agriculture and other sciences dealing with biology or the living beings, that was far more easier. But the study of the human mind was also taken up, and it was more difficult because uh, it was more subtle. To handle some gross object is very easy. To do science, to dissect it, to find out how it functions, the physiological functions, even in living beings, it is far more easier than dissecting a human mind, to find out what is ailing the human mind, what are the problems. That is far more difficult to diagnose. That is what Swami Sarvasthananda says. And then there was one more quest. After trying to more or less find solutions to find out the invisible chain of cause and effect which gives rise to mental problems, suicides and other things, they found that there is some deeper reality which is influencing both the mind and the body. It is not just the body that influences the mind and the reactive mind influences the body. That is true at a very gross level, but we have to go deeper. The idea of Vijnanamaya Kosha, the deeper possibility of something else. Is there something which is beyond the body and the mind? So they said, otherwise, why is not human being able to solve the problem? Human beings are not able to solve the problems of the mind. Every day, there are so many cases of mental disorders. Physical disorders, I understand. There are biological reasons, pandemics and all. But what about the mind? Everybody who is influenced by the pandemic does not get affected in a similar way. Some people have more resilience, and some people get mentally upset. They can't control their minds because they find it difficult to handle their mind than to handle their body. So even some of the greatest physicians or the doctors, when it comes to handling their own minds, unfortunately, they need help of psychiatrists or other people. That is where spirituality comes into the picture. Now, Swami Sarvasthananda is setting up the whole background. You should remember, he was a doctor himself. Had Sri Ramakrishna not come in his life, he would have finished and would have become a very successful allopathic doctor. He was studying medicine. One should remember this. He was a very good medical student, but he gave up his studies because of his spiritual pursuits. But he had the basic knowledge and he had the training necessary to scientifically approach a subject which was considered to be dogmatic or based on beliefs. The entire problem with religion was that religion was considered as a subject which is purely based on belief and faith. I believe and I follow this religion. But Swami Sarvasthananda, like Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda before him, firmly believed that just as a scientist analyzes things in the laboratory, whether it is inanimate objects, whether it is the living beings, whether it is research in physical sciences, the biological sciences, the aeronautical sciences, or the space sciences, the same methodology can be followed to study the individual life, the inner life of man. What are the root causes of our physical disorders that medicine can do? It can be traced to certain physiological imbalances, but which of course are has been classified as prana in our Indian Vedantic or even in Ayurveda. They say this pranic imbalance. When prana interacts with the body, any imbalance, they call it doshas in Ayurveda. So any pranic imbalance, and they have reduced even the science of Ayurveda is such a wonderful science, they reduce all the problems to three doshas. They don't go on treating the individual diseases. They say there is a basic dosha which is responsible. They have defined only three doshas, and you find out which dosha in what proportion is affecting you, give the treatment. Though it is slow, it works, it goes to the root of the problem, and many physiological disorders can be solved. So also in psychology, yoga psychology has reduced all the problems, though they are subtle, they are complex. They said you understand what this yoga is. That is why we took so much of time in the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras class discussing these kleshas, because they are our immediate problems. Samadhi is not our problem, because very few of us will reach that state. So Patanjali begins from kindergarten. He starts first, find out what is causing your chitta vritti to just jump about. What is causing distraction in your mind? Before even controlling the mind, try to find out what is the root cause of your mental imbalance, which gives rise to physical problems. Not only mental problems, but physical problems, and makes your life difficult. Suffering increases. So to go to the root of the suffering, yoga suggests that you handle these five kleshas. That's why we took so much time trying to analyze and discuss what it really means and how it affects our personality, the inner personality. And then we also discuss on Wednesday, apart from the Friday class on Raj Yoga, we discuss in our Vedanta, the science of human possibilities, which try to combine all the discoveries made in Vedanta and yoga, wherein we discuss not only the external personality, but more of the internal personality, which has been neglected so far. It never forms part of our education. People gave so much less importance, as they did in the olden days also. It is not a new phenomena. The world has always attracted people, the external world. And the external personality, the external development has always fascinated man. And the reason is given by one of the best Upanishads, Kathopanishad, to a young boy, Nachiketa. He says, God has practically destroyed the world by making man go outward. So all the discoveries in the outer world have not solved our internal problems. And that is why he says, it is imperative that he's telling this Nachiketa that you are a dhira, you are a creative person, you are a bold person, you are a sincere person. So that's why I'm imparting this knowledge to you. And this is a top secret, in the sense that in those days it was so difficult to get true teachers like Yama, and he was the Lord of Death himself. So he says, I'm telling you this secret which is difficult to understand, which is difficult to practice but easy to understand. And he expounds the glory of the spiritual aspect of man, the spiritual possibility within every human being. So this quest, as Shardanandji says, no matter how much progress we make in the external sciences, in the individual as well as collective life of the nation, we find, he says, that all this progress has not improved the quality, the inner life of man. They have waged an incessant war against each other. And also in the external field, no doubt they want to conquer the forces of energy shortage, the force which are troubling man now, the forces of destruction, environmental damage that is. So science is trying to handle. There is a kind of urgency with which we are trying to address these problems and achieve success on that front. And countless desires have again motivated man to create newer and newer things of enjoyment. And they feel that by doing that, they will solve the problem of life. But imagine the endless struggle, which the infinite progress which we make. Earlier, our desires were limited to a few things. Now there are so many models of cars and phones and many devices, which is increasing our complications. The mind is becoming more complicated. We do not realize. Not that we should be ignorant. Progress in the external field is excellent, but if it is not matched or balanced by progress in the inner field, you have to make use of science and technology. Otherwise, we will not be talking here, sitting so in the comfort of our house. We are able to communicate with each other, exchange ideas, which was not possible 50 years ago. We could not even talk over phone. Phone was also so difficult to was difficult to access and connect with each other. Now it is so easy to communicate. So this progress is necessary. I'm not saying, or Swami Shardanji is not saying, that external progress has harmed human beings. It has definitely not harmed, but its wrong use, if it has just resulted in increasing your desires, you have to make use of the developments in science and technology to evolve within also. If science and technology helps you to become more interiorized, to become more concerned about our inner development, as much concerned about our inner development as our external skills, then the science and technology, the development in science and technology has definitely left its impact on the inner world. So he says this limitless struggle, this endless struggle humankind is making, make them believe that they will explore the human possibilities both in the external as well as the internal world. And when they do it, when they give equal importance to explore the possibilities of the inner world, then my man will be really fulfilled. That is what he is trying to say. So this is the first paragraph. And then after generalizing this, we have not yet started the life of the birth of Sri Ramakrishna. He is just preparing the background, because as a true scientist, as a true historian, he was a wonderful student of history as well. He wanted to analyze the reasons why Sri Ramakrishna had to incarnate. It's not just a rural setting in Bengal. You see people, the other day we were discussing the simple rustic life of Holy Mother. They apparently they came as ignorant people in a remote village, but their impact is more on the so-called modernized human beings, modernized individual who thinks he is too wise and who thinks that the people who are born in the villages are good for nothing. They are ignorant, they need to be educated. No, to shatter this myth, Sri Ramakrishna, Sri Ma Sharda Devi, both of them chose not to be literate in the modern sense. They were not as much developed in science and technology, the external sciences, as perhaps even Shardananji and Swami Vivekananda. Shardananji was a doctor, Vivekananda was a great student of English and so many other subjects in arts. They were not equipped, but they had this inner development. They had access to this inner development, the science of inner development, which was very much needed for the to match them, not only to match but to complement the progress that was made in the Western world and which came to India through Kolkata, because that was the capital of British, and all the benefits of the European advancement in science and technology, some of the benefits at least, though the British government was not very keen to start scientific associations and scientific uh, institutes here so that they can have the monopoly. It's natural. Nobody would like to give up one's own monopoly. That's why many of our scientists and who were living during that time were encouraged by Nivedita to make progress in the external sciences also, like Jagdish Chandra Bose, and there were so many other people. And Dr. Mahendra Lal Sarkar, who was treating Sri Ramakrishna, was a doctor. He believed that science can save mankind, though he knew that Sri Ramakrishna's method of scientific spirituality. He was impressed because he studied Sri Ramakrishna's different visions, the different conditions of his personality, of his inner visions. He tried to find out a scientific explanation, a medical explanation for all the phenomena. That led to some kind of curiosity. What is this phenomena which my science, my medical science cannot explain? So there were some people who were well versed in both the sciences, like Swamiji and also like Swami Shardananji. That is why he is trying to first make a list of all the progress that was made during that time, and then he is trying to compare it with what Sri Ramakrishna has complemented by pouring his knowledge of spirituality, which is not less important. In fact, it is more important. The inner life, the inner possibilities of mankind are more important than the external possibilities and the external achievements. That is why man is suffering today. With all the progress in science and technology and other fields, the fields of knowledge, the vistas have broadened. A lot of development is taking place. But has it made man happier? To supply that need, these great avatars are born. That is what Swami Shardanand is trying to explain, that the materialistic progress originated in the West and spread to the East. So he says the influence of the material progress, definitely it has brought the East and the West closer. The ancient Eastern outlook on life is undergoing a change and is becoming more and more like that of the West. He's observing that also. In that desire to compete with the Western people, Indians blindly, or maybe they were so impressed that they rejected everything that was Eastern. That tendency was there. So Swami Shardanand is pointing out, though Western technology and science brought the Western powers in contact with the Eastern powers. Earlier, each country was like an island. Everybody was developing their own culture or civilization. The impact was not felt on each other. But after the trade and commerce and other things brought the world together, the ideas of the West came to the East. But similarly, the ideas of the East percolated into the West and saved them and will be saving them. That is what Swami Shardananji wants to emphasize, that Sri Ramakrishna came and stayed in the place which was a confluence of the best of Western civilization, because Calcutta was the headquarters of the British Empire in India. So it is where the science and technology, that's why they say what Calcutta thinks today, what Bengal thinks today, India thinks tomorrow. That was true in those days, because British brought all the benefits of science and technology, whatever they wanted for their purpose. It was not everything, but whatever little they brought, the Indians were grabbed it. Some of the great scientists who were who thrived during the British rule in India, like Jagdish Chandra Bose and all, they got the benefits of science. They did their own research and they also contributed a lot. So the Eastern outlook of life, which was originally in the Vedic age a perfect system, but unfortunately with the passage of time it had degraded. So not that everything Western was bad or everything Eastern was good. There were problems in the Eastern way of life also. The ignorance, the quarrel, the difference of opinion, the sectarianism, uh, the jealousy, the poverty, and so many things which was evident. So that needed correction. So a commingling of the East and the West was what necessary. So that's why he in this paragraph he totally compares and tries to find out that if we study the present condition, means in those days in 1910, Persia, that is Iran, later on it became Iran, China, Japan, India, among others, you will find the same phenomena is happening there. The Western powers somehow have managed to control most of these Eastern regions politically, and they have brought their ideas with them. And in the process, the East is also likely to give something to the West, and that commingling will be beneficial for both. Then he says, but he doesn't want to predict anything. He says, whatever may be the future outcome, there is no doubt that the West has influenced the East, and it seems inevitable, at least externally, that a time will come when the whole world will be westernized. So that was the danger. Whether it will happen, he says, this is the phenomena which was observed in those days. So if that happened, what would happen? What would be the result? He is discussing in the third paragraph, and we'll discuss it in our next class. So far, to summarize, Swami Shardananji starts with the wonderful discoveries, and he says that most of the external discoveries which were done in the West, they have had their impact on the Eastern civilizations, who tried to focus more on the inner development of the man. So if we say if it is 50%, we should focus on the external development, 50% on the inner development, then a complete true human personality will be created. So that is why Swami Vivekananda very often said, the confluence of the East and West, confluence of science and religion, the confluence of many things, the East and the West, the best elements of the East and the best elements of the West, they have to come together. For that, we have to analyze what is the problem ailing the Western civilization, the Western approach of focusing too much on the external development, and what is the benefit or what is the danger of following too much the internal development. Swamiji also says there is a danger, because if people are not prepared and they focus only on their internal development and neglect the outer, then society will suffer. He said that to produce a few saints, millions of people are reduced to beggars, and there is so much hunger in the Western nations, because if the focus is more on just spiritual progress in a society, not in an individual person, but in a collective way, then that country suffers. Because if more and more people, that is what Swamiji pointed out, a little bit of toned down materialism is necessary for India and all the other countries, because with that they can develop the other side of the personality, the external, which will serve as a protection for developing the inner. That's why Thakur used to say, the religion cannot be had on an empty stomach. You can't have a religion when you are hungry. You have to fulfill the certain basic human needs for physical survival. You need to have a body, a strong mind, to even practice spirituality. So the practical solution, according to this, we'll discuss it in the next class, is to take the best of science and technology, including the medical technology, or whatever is necessary in the external field of life, and combine it with the best of the internal technology which Indians and the the Orientals have developed, and then combine it to make life more balanced. So who will influence whom? Swami Shardanand is trying to discuss to determine the long-term effects of the Western influence, He says we have to analyze the West and analyze the life of their people, not just criticize them. So also to determine the long-term effects of the Indian quest for spirituality, we have to study and its influence on other nations. How many saints it has produced, how many prophets it has produced, Krishna, Rama, Buddha. So he's slowly coming to the conclusion that why are such great spiritual personalities born in India? Because they want to complement what has been done in the West, and they want to give their share of inner development to the Western world. And then we have to combine both to produce a new civilization. So Sri Ramakrishna's role is not as easy. He didn't just come to Kamarpukur and live a quiet life like somebody thought. It's not that Holy Mother came and lived a simple life and we appreciate that simplicity and we go back, we tell everybody, the whole humanity, that no, you go back to the villages. That is not what is meant here. She was utterly modern. She was very much comfortable with the modern science and technology. In fact, she encouraged the girls to go to school to learn modern knowledge. And she was very modern in that sense, Holy Mother, though she herself never went to the university. So also Sri Ramakrishna, but he was preoccupied with the science of spirituality. You can't be master of both. You can't excel both in the science of external sciences or the material sciences or the science of spirituality. So Sri Ramakrishna focused on one excellence to be complemented by the greatness and excellence of the Western method of external developing the external sciences. When both are combined together, we have a wonderful civilization. So the effect of developing both Western life and Western civilization and also the Eastern life and the Eastern civilization will be studied in the next class. So I'll just see if we can answer a few questions. Yeah. The first question is, did Dr. Sarkar later become a devotee of Thakur? No, he was a devotee. He was not a devotee in the sense we understand it. We think devotee means somebody who obeys. That is not Swami Vivekananda's or Sri Ramakrishna's definition of a devotee. Devotees are they who really hold on to some ideas and of the people who have inspired them and practice them in their life. So whatever little Swami, whatever little Mahendralal Sarkar, a great initiator of the science movement in India, if you may say so. You can say he was the father of the science movement in India. He started the Indian Association for Cultivation of Sciences, where C.V. Raman got the Nobel Prize, and before him, Dr. Jagdish Chandra Bose, Praful Chandra Roy, they all were scientists in that whatever little funds he gathered and made an institute for studying sciences. So his contribution is there, but at the same time, he did not become a devotee in that way, but he respected and had immense respect for Sri Ramakrishna and became a lifelong admirer. Though he believed that science was more important, he perhaps did not understand the role of spirituality in life. That's why in that sense, in that particular sense, he cannot be considered as a devotee, but he was a great admirer and he loved Sri Ramakrishna because of his broad heart, compassion, and wonderful love. He could definitely feel Sri Ramakrishna's love. So, how can we hope to eradicate poverty in India through spirituality? It is not spiritualism, it is spirituality. Spiritualism is a technical word where all sorts of magic and other powers are used, which are popular but are really useless for pure spirituality. Spiritualism is a science where you use the powers of the mind to manipulate, sometimes for evil purposes. So, through spirituality, we can eradicate poverty and we can eradicate all the problems. But through spiritualism, we cannot do. Spiritualism is often used to gain some powers to harm somebody, which is definitely not what definitely not part of religion or spirituality. It is just selfish desire in man that makes them use this spiritualism to do many things which uh, they cannot do through human effort. They want to use their uh, some kind of uh, that evil mentality influences them. Not very often evil, they start with good intentions, but often human greed is such that they use spiritualism for various material gains and other purposes, which is not good. But yes, spirituality can definitely help reducing poverty, not directly but indirectly, by making man nobler. If his heart becomes more broad, then he will try to serve these poor, underprivileged people, not with the attitude of, not with arrogance, but with respect. That is the difference between a rich man serving a poor man or the underprivileged and a spiritual man serving the poor. Both are serving, giving them material benefits to eradicate their poverty. But at the same time, the spiritual person will try to convert that into sadhana through karma yoga in a way that it benefits his own spiritual progress and makes the change more sustainable. He will not give in charity, but he will see that his money is used in such a way that it empowers the the poor people or the underprivileged people to come out of poverty by their own efforts. He does not just give money to relieve, because the beggar, if you give him money, if he depends on you eternally, then it is not a good sign. Instead of that, if you empower him in whatever way you can with the help of your material wealth, and also of course with a wonderful loving heart, if you do it as a worship, then it impacts him more, and he the poverty can, not only poverty can be eradicated, but you can make a man stand on, a human being stand on his or her own feet. So that is what spirituality can do to eradicate poverty, not directly, but by empowering that person and empowering the practitioner of spirituality to develop his heart. So we'll conclude. If there's any more question, uh, otherwise we will conclude. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.